You don't wake up to an alarm, you wake up to a decision. A decision most people lose before their feet even touch the ground. Because the morning, that's not just the start of your day, it's the battleground of your future. And the question is simple. Are you owning your morning, or is your morning owning you? The first hour of your morning is not just a segment of time, it's a declaration. Before a single word is spoken, before a single message is read, you are already telling the world who you are through how you begin. Most people don't realize this because they treat mornings like a routine to survive instead of a moment to define themselves. They wake up reacting to alarms, reacting to responsibilities, reacting to pressure. But when your day begins with reaction, your identity slowly becomes reactive. You become someone who follows, someone who responds, someone who waits. Owning your morning flips that script. It turns you into the initiator, the one who sets the tone, the one who decides how the story unfolds. There is a quiet power in those early moments that most people give away too easily. The moment your eyes open, your mind is in its most impressionable state. It hasn't been cluttered yet. It hasn't been pulled in 10 different directions. That's the moment where identity is shaped most effectively. But what do most people do with it? They grab their phones, they scroll, they consume, they allow other people's thoughts, problems, and priorities to enter their mind before they've even checked in with themselves. And without realizing it, they hand over control. Because whatever you feed your mind first thing in the morning doesn't just inform your thoughts. It frames your entire day. Owning that first hour means protecting it like it matters, because it does. It means understanding that your mindset isn't something you stumble upon later. It's something you construct intentionally at the start. When you take time to center yourself, to think clearly, to align with what matters, you are building a foundation that everything else will stand on. Without that foundation, your day becomes unstable. You drift. You get pulled into urgency instead of purpose. But when that first hour is yours, fully yours, you walk into the day grounded, not guessing who you are, but knowing. It's also in that first hour that discipline reveals itself in its purest form, not the loud, visible kind that people praise, but the quiet kind that nobody sees. The decision to get up when it's easier to stay in bed. The choice to stay focused when distractions are within reach. The commitment to do something meaningful when nothing is forcing you to. These are small decisions, almost invisible in the moment, but they stack. They reinforce a message in your mind, do what I say I'm going to do. And over time, that message becomes identity. You don't have to convince yourself anymore. You've proven it. Another truth most people overlook is that your first hour doesn't just influence your productivity. It influences your self-respect. When you start your day with intention, there's a sense of control that follows you. You feel aligned. You feel capable. But when you start your day scattered, rushed, or distracted, that feeling lingers too. It creates a subtle tension, a sense that you're already behind, already trying to catch up. And that feeling doesn't just disappear. It affects how you make decisions, how you handle pressure, how you show up in every interaction throughout the day. The first hour is also where clarity is either created or lost. If you don't take time to think about what matters, the world will decide for you. You'll spend your energy on whatever is loudest, whatever is most urgent, whatever demands your attention in the moment. But urgency is not the same as importance. Owning your morning gives you the space to separate the two. It allows you to step back and ask yourself what actually moves your life forward. And when you start your day with that level of clarity, your actions become more precise, more intentional, more effective. Finally, the first hour is not about perfection. It's about ownership. It doesn't have to look like anyone else's routine. It doesn't have to be complicated or extreme. What matters is that it is yours, designed with purpose, executed with consistency. Because when you own that first hour, You're not just organizing your time, you're shaping your identity. You're becoming someone who leads themselves before trying to lead anything else. And that shift, subtle as it may seem, changes everything about how the rest of your day unfolds. Motivation is one of the most misunderstood forces in personal growth. People wait for it like it's weather, something that will arrive at the right time, in the right mood, under the right conditions. But motivation doesn't operate that way. It is inconsistent, emotional, and unpredictable. Some days it feels powerful, other days it's completely absent. And when people build their lives around something so unstable, they unknowingly build a life that is also unstable. That's why relying on motivation is the first quiet mistake that keeps most people stuck. It feels good in theory, but it fails in practice. Ritual, on the other hand, is not emotional. It is structural. It does not depend on how you feel. It depends on what you have decided. A ritual is something you return to even when your energy is low, even when your mood is off, even when your mind is resisting. It removes the need to negotiate with yourself. There is no daily debate about whether you will show up or not. You simply do, and in that simplicity lies its power. Because while motivation pushes you when it's present, ritual carries you when it's not. The difference becomes most visible in the early hours of the morning. That is where discipline is either built or broken. If your morning depends on feeling ready, you will lose more days than you win. But if your morning is built on ritual, fixed actions performed in a fixed order, you remove hesitation. You eliminate the mental friction that drains energy before the day even begins. You don't ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" You already know the answer doesn't matter. You're not waiting for agreement from your emotions. You're executing a system. There's also something deeper happening when ritual takes over. It begins to reshape your identity at a subconscious level. Every time you follow through on a ritual, you reinforce a belief. I am someone who follows through. That belief doesn't form in moments of inspiration. It forms in moments of repetition. You don't become disciplined by thinking about discipline. You become disciplined by practicing it when it is inconvenient. And ritual is the framework that makes that possible without constant internal struggle. Another important truth is that motivation often creates inconsistency disguised as effort. People feel inspired, so they push hard for a few days. They wake up early. They plan intensely. They try to change everything at once. But then motivation fades and everything collapses with it. They mistake intensity for progress, when in reality, consistency is what creates transformation. Ritual protects you from this cycle. It doesn't ask you to be extreme. It asks you to be steady. And steadiness is what compounds into real change over time. Ritual also builds resilience against resistance. Every meaningful goal in life comes with resistance. Internal resistance, external resistance, emotional resistance. There will always be days when your mind tries to convince you to stop, to delay, to negotiate. But when your actions are ritualized, those arguments lose power. You don't need to win a mental debate every morning. The decision has already been made in advance. And that is what makes ritual so powerful. It removes choice from moments where choice becomes dangerous. Over time, ritual begins to feel less like something you do and more like something you are. The actions stop feeling like effort and start feeling like structure. You no longer question whether you will show up, you just do. And in that shift, something significant changes. You stop relying on emotional energy to move forward. Instead, you rely on identity and repetition. That is when growth becomes sustainable, not because life becomes easier, but because your system becomes stronger than your mood. Silence is one of the most overlooked tools in modern life, yet it is also one of the most powerful. Most people wake up and immediately surround themselves with noise, notifications, conversations, videos, news, and endless streams of information. The mind never gets a moment to settle. It goes from sleep to stimulation without any transition. And over time, that constant input creates a mind that is reactive, scattered, and easily influenced. Silence is not the absence of activity, it is the presence of clarity. It is the space where your thoughts stop being reactions and start becoming reflections. When you sit in silence in the morning, something subtle but important begins to happen. You start to hear yourself again. Not the version of you shaped by external opinions or digital noise, but the version that exists underneath all of that. At first, it might feel uncomfortable because silence removes distraction, and distraction is what most people use to avoid themselves. But if you stay with it, silence becomes a mirror. It shows you what you've been avoiding, what you've been delaying, and what you've been ignoring. That awareness is not always easy, but it is necessary for growth. In silence, your mind begins to reset its baseline throughout the day. Your thoughts are pulled in different directions by urgency and external demands. But in the morning, before the world has fully entered your space, silence allows you to observe your thinking instead of being controlled by it. You begin to notice patterns, how quickly you jump to stress, how often you overthink, how easily your attention is pulled away. And once you see these patterns clearly, you gain the ability to interrupt them. You stop being carried by your thoughts and start guiding them. There is also a deeper neurological effect at play. When you consistently expose your mind to silence, you are essentially training it to slow down. In a world where speed is constant, this slowing down becomes a form of strength. It improves focus, sharpens awareness, and strengthens emotional control. You are no longer living in a constant state of stimulation. You are learning to exist without it. And that ability to stay calm in the absence of noise is what allows you to think clearly when others are overwhelmed. Silence also creates space for honesty. When there is no external input, there is no distraction from truth. You start to ask yourself better questions. What am I actually working toward? What am I avoiding? What decisions am I delaying? These questions don't always have immediate answers, but they don't need them. What matters is that you are finally asking them. Because most people never do. They stay busy enough to avoid reflection, and that avoidance slowly shapes their entire life. Silence interrupts that cycle. Over time, the practice of morning silence becomes more than just a habit. It becomes a mental recalibration tool. It allows you to reset emotional noise before it turns into action. It gives you space to separate what is urgent from what is important. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches you that not every thought deserves your attention. Some thoughts are just noise in disguise. Silence helps you filter them out before they influence your decisions. Eventually, you begin to notice a shift. The mind that once felt chaotic in the morning starts to feel more structured. The thoughts that once rushed in without control start to slow down. You are no longer entering the day in reaction mode. You are entering it with awareness, and that awareness becomes the foundation for everything else you do. The moment you wake up, your body is in a transitional state, half rested, half alert, still carrying the weight of sleep. What most people do at this stage is stay still, sometimes for far too long, letting inertia quietly take control. They reach for their phone, scroll without thinking, or remain in bed negotiating with time. But stillness in the wrong moment sends a message to your body, and that message is subtle but powerful. We are not starting yet. The problem is the body believes what you repeatedly tell it, not what you intend. And if your mornings begin in passivity, your energy follows that pattern throughout the day. Movement, even in its simplest form, changes that entire equation. The human body is not designed to wake up and remain dormant. It is designed to activate. When you stretch, walk, breathe deeply, or engage in any form of physical motion early in the day, you are sending a direct signal to your nervous system. We are active, we are engaged, we are in control. That signal doesn't just stay physical, it becomes psychological. Your brain begins to shift out of sleep inertia and into presence. You are no longer drifting, you are initiating. This is why movement in the morning is not about intensity. It is about ignition. You don't need to push yourself into extreme workouts immediately after waking. In fact, forcing intensity too early can sometimes backfire. What matters is activation, not exhaustion. A few minutes of stretching, light exercise, or even intentional walking can be enough to awaken your system. It's about breaking the stillness that keeps your body in a passive state. Because once that stillness is broken, momentum begins to form naturally. There is also a deeper connection between movement and mental clarity that most people underestimate. When your body moves, blood flow increases, oxygen levels rise, and your brain becomes more alert. But beyond the biological effects, there is a psychological shift happening too. Movement creates a sense of agency. It reminds you that you are not stuck, not frozen, not waiting for energy to arrive. You are generating it. And that realization alone changes how you approach everything else in your day. Another important aspect of morning movement is its effect on emotional state. Emotions are not just mental, they are physical. When your body is stagnant, emotions like fatigue, hesitation, and low motivation tend to linger. But when your body is active, those emotional states begin to shift. You are essentially interrupting emotional inertia through physical action. It is difficult to stay mentally stuck when your body is in motion. Movement creates an exit route from emotional heaviness. Over time, consistent morning movement begins to rewire how you perceive effort itself. What once felt like resistance starts to feel like initiation. You stop seeing movement as something you have to do and start seeing it as something that defines how you enter your day. It becomes less about fitness and more about identity. You are no longer someone who waits for energy. You are someone who generates it through action. That distinction is subtle, but it is powerful. Eventually, this practice begins to shape your overall discipline. Because once you prove to yourself day after day that you can move before comfort sets in, you build a deeper trust with yourself. You stop hesitating in other areas of life as well. If you can move your body before the world demands anything from you, you begin to believe you can act before conditions are perfect in other situations too. And that mindset carries forward into decisions, challenges, and goals far beyond the morning itself. Focus is not just a skill, it is a form of protection. In today's world, your attention is constantly under attack. From the moment you wake up, countless forces compete for your mind: notifications, messages, news updates, social media, and other people's priorities disguised as urgency. If you do not intentionally guard your focus in the morning, you are not just starting your day, you are surrendering it. Most people don't realize this. They believe they are choosing what to pay attention to, but in reality, they are reacting to whatever is loudest. And what is loudest is rarely what is most important. The early morning is the only part of the day where your attention is still relatively unclaimed. It is not yet fragmented by responsibilities, conversations, or digital noise. This is your window of control. But that window closes quickly once you start consuming information passively. The moment you open your phone without intention, your focus begins to scatter. You are no longer directing your attention. You are reacting to it. And that shift, though small in appearance, changes the entire trajectory of your day. True focus begins with intention, not activity. It is not about doing more things. It is about choosing one thing that actually matters and giving it your full presence. Most people confuse productivity with busyness. They fill their mornings with tasks, messages, and quick wins, but never stop to ask whether any of it is actually moving their life forward. Focus eliminates that confusion. It forces you to ask a simple but uncomfortable question: what deserves my attention most right now? And then it requires you to stay with the answer long enough to act on it. There is a discipline in resisting distraction that most people underestimate. Distraction is not just external, it is emotional. It often comes disguised as comfort. Checking your phone feels harmless. Switching tasks feels productive. Jumping from one thing to another feels like progress. But in reality, it is fragmentation. Your attention gets split into pieces, and no single piece ever receives enough depth to create meaningful results. Focus, on the other hand, is uncomfortable at first because it demands stillness in a world that rewards movement. It requires you to stay with one thought, one task, one direction. Even when your mind wants to escape, when you protect your focus in the morning, something powerful begins to happen internally. Your mind starts to trust you. It learns that when you say, "We are doing this," you actually follow through. That trust reduces internal resistance over time. You stop fighting yourself so much. Instead of constantly redirecting your attention, you begin to flow with it. And that flow state is where real progress lies, not in scattered effort, but in sustained engagement with what matters. Another important aspect of morning focus is that it sets the tone for decision making throughout the rest of the day. When your morning is unfocused, your decisions tend to follow the same pattern: reactive, scattered, and emotionally driven. But when your morning begins with clarity and intentional focus, your mind carries that structure forward. You become less susceptible to unnecessary interruptions. You start filtering information instead of absorbing everything. You begin to recognize what deserves your energy and what does not. Focus also strengthens your ability to delay gratification. Every time you choose meaningful work over immediate distraction, you are training your brain to prioritize long-term value over short-term stimulation. That is not just a productivity shift, it is a cognitive one. You are reshaping how your reward system responds to effort. Instead of seeking constant stimulation, you begin to find satisfaction in depth, progress, and completion. And that shift compounds quietly but powerfully over time. There is also a deeper identity shift that happens when you consistently protect your morning focus. You stop identifying as someone who tries to be productive and start identifying as someone who directs their attention with purpose. That difference matters more than it seems because identity determines behavior. When you see yourself as focused, you naturally begin to act in ways that reinforce that belief. You become more selective, more deliberate, and less reactive without forcing it. Eventually, focus becomes less about effort and more about standard. You stop questioning whether you should concentrate. You simply do. Distraction still exists, but it no longer controls you. You notice it, but you do not follow it. And in that shift, your mornings stop being fragmented beginnings and start becoming structured launches into meaningful action. Consistency is where real transformation happens, not in the dramatic moments, not in sudden bursts of inspiration, but in the quiet repetition of actions that seem small on their own. Most people misunderstand change because they look for visible breakthroughs. They expect life to shift after one powerful decision or one highly motivated morning. But real change does not announce itself loudly. It builds silently, layer by layer, through repeated behavior that slowly reshapes identity. What you do consistently becomes what you believe about yourself, and what you believe about yourself eventually becomes who you are. In the beginning, consistency feels almost invisible. You wake up, you follow your morning ritual, you focus, you move, you stay disciplined, but nothing seems dramatically different. There is no instant reward, no immediate transformation that confirms your effort. And this is the point where most people quit, because the human mind is wired to expect quick feedback. It wants results it can see and feel immediately. But consistency works differently. It delays visible rewards in order to build something deeper: stability, structure, and identity alignment. Every repeated action sends a signal to your brain. When you show up once, it is an intention. When you show up twice, it is a coincidence. But when you show up repeatedly, it becomes identity. You are no longer someone who is trying to build discipline. You are someone who acts with discipline. That shift is not emotional. It is neurological. Your brain starts to reduce resistance because it recognizes the pattern. What once required effort begins to require less friction, not because the task got easier, but because you became more familiar with it. Consistency also removes the emotional decision making that weakens progress. Without consistency, every day feels like a negotiation. You wake up and ask yourself, do I feel like doing this today? That question alone creates instability. Some days the answer is yes, some days it is no, and your progress becomes inconsistent. But when consistency becomes non-negotiable, that internal debate disappears. You stop asking whether you will show up because showing up is already part of your structure. That mental clarity frees enormous energy that would otherwise be wasted on hesitation. Another powerful effect of consistency is compounding. Small actions, repeated daily, begin to stack in ways that are not immediately visible but become undeniable over time. One focused morning does not change your life. 10 might not either. But 50, 60, 100, those begin to reshape your thinking, your confidence, your identity. You stop reacting like the person you used to be. You start responding like the person you are becoming. And that transition is gradual but irreversible. There is also a quiet emotional strength that develops through consistency. On days when motivation is absent, consistency carries you. On days when energy is low, consistency stabilizes you. On days when doubt appears, consistency reminds you of your track record. You are no longer relying on how you feel in the moment. You are relying on evidence you have built over time. And that evidence becomes your anchor. It keeps you steady when circumstances fluctuate. Over time, consistency begins to change your perception of effort itself. What once felt difficult starts to feel normal. What once required pushing now feels like structure. The resistance that used to slow you down begins to fade, not because challenges disappear, but because you have adapted to them. You are no longer shocked by repetition. You are strengthened by it. And in that shift, discipline stops being something you practice and starts becoming something you embody. Eventually, consistency stops feeling like an obligation and starts feeling like identity maintenance. You are no longer doing things just to improve. You are doing them to remain aligned with who you have become. And in that state, transformation is no longer something you chase. It is something you continuously reinforce one morning at a time, without needing external validation or visible proof. And in the end, it was never about the perfect morning, the flawless routine, or the most disciplined version of yourself on display for the world to admire. It was always about something quieter, something more personal. The choice to begin again and again, even when no one is watching. The decision to show up for your life before life demands anything from you. Because mornings don't just start your day, they shape your direction. And the way you meet those early hours slowly becomes the way you meet everything else: pressure, opportunity, failure, and growth. Not through sudden transformation, but through steady repetition that builds a new standard within you. You don't wake up one day as a different person. You wake up one day and realize the person you were becoming has already been built. In the silence, in the discipline, in the consistency you once underestimated.